Right, ladies and gentlemen, some preliminaries before we start. I thought this was, some thanks and introduction and one small apology. I thought this was a very obscure part of the battlefield, but since I've been researching this talk, people have been coming out of the woodwork with lots of deep knowledge. So I'd like to thank, as we're on tape, Chris Noble for sharing his detailed understanding of the events of the 20th, and to Sebastian Laudan, who I've never met, who shared an enormous number of translated German records, and there's a lot of that material here. The apology is there are a lot of French place names here, and my pronunciation of French actually makes native speakers start to cry. So I just hope you will tolerate that. I'm Fraser Skirrow. I am a battalion historian. The natural habitat of the battalion historian is the reading rooms at Kew. But since all of the war diaries are online and the records are online and the work of the Western Front Association, actually many battalion historians are now sort of seen out in daylight. And you can tell us because our great desire is to persuade anyone who stands still that it is our battalions, in this case West Riding Territorials, that won the war single-handed. So there's the bias for today. So let us, without further ado, look at what we're going to do this morning. We will run through a little bit of the situation around the Battle of Marfaux to get it positioned in your minds, and then we'll dive into a bit of detail about where it is actually being fought, because the ground is very important. There's then a section on the 20th itself, but we're not going to do a blow-by-blow of the battle. We're just going to look at essentially setting the scene, because what is important is the process of thinking and the actions that the men of the 62nd took in order to turn around what was a fairly disastrous start. And then we'll look at, well, did it work on the day, and see what we can learn from that. So, as background, 62nd West Riding Division, second line Territorials, very late to go to France. They don't arrive until January 1917. The divisional emblem, by the time you get to 62nd Division, you're kind of out of lions and griffins and dragons. So we got the pelican. However, arriving in early 1917, the division is very roughly handled at Bullecourt. And after that, essentially is completely restructured, retrained and rearmed. It is under command of General Braithwaite, who also had a rough start in that he was responsible for much of the planning at Gallipoli. And he turns around the division. And so later in 1917 at Cambrai, at the first capture of Havrincourt, the division does very well indeed and takes a huge amount of land for very few casualties. They fight an almost textbook defensive action at Bucquoy in March of 1918 at the high water mark of the March offensive in the north. By the time of our story here in July 1918, the division is in very good condition. The battalions are up to strength, they have been rearmed, retrained, and have not fought for a considerable period. So it is a very strong division that enters our story. And to talk a little bit more about it as a fighting unit, by 1918, the tactics of the British Army have been largely formulated. And here we have the division in the attack, SS-135, or my personal bedtime reading, SS-143, which is instructions for the training of a platoon. So from divisional level down to platoon level, there is actually a set out way of doing things that units can learn and practice. There's also huge change from the early days of 1917. The way that battlefield leadership is trained is different. So many of the scenarios that they train to are perfectly recognizable from anyone who was trained in the 1980s. They have changed the way that they operate on the battlefield, the formations that they use, the weapons systems that they use are all very different. And their ability to deal with the supporting arms, the way that barrages are laid, has also come on enormously. And of course, there's the icing on the cake. armour. I don't know if we have any ex-armoured officers. No? Okay, so I can be as rude as I wish. Oh, no, I can't. So, let me take you a little bit further south. So, in May of 1918, 30 German divisions attack between Soissons and Reims. And it is a complete surprise. The French army, Foch himself says this, the French army is pushed back, and you get this start of this huge salient. And then there is another surge in July of 1918, around the 15th. And that builds on this success, and it pushes this enormous salient out down to the Marne. Now, Foch does not have enough troops effectively to counterattack what's going on. So he requests support from the British, and it is agreed that 4 divisions will be sent south to help. And one of those is the 62nd, another one is the 51st, who will also enter the story. Now, they're going to plug the gap in his attacking line, and his plan, that salient represents an opportunity. If you were to attack from both sides of this salient at the top, you are in a position to nip, encircle, and capture the German forces within that. Now, in order to do that, of course, he has to attack on both sides of it. And our story is going to be over here in the valley of the River Ardre, on the right-hand side of this salient, because to take it, you must advance up this valley. So, let's go to the valley. Modern map. The valley we are looking at comes from Epinay down here, through Poissy, Marfaux, Chamouzy, and this way to Bligny. As you can see, left to right, this is a very steep, open valley. Woods on the hills this side, very steep on the right-hand side, and heavily wooded on the top. And the Germans have brought in a considerable number of units to block this. Originally, later in this week in July, it was to be the attack on Epinay. So they've come this far, and as far as they're concerned, they're taking a breather before they go on further. And you have the 39th Fusilier Regiment, the machine gun companies of the 351st, Infantry Regiment 53, who are covering North Marfaux and Citron, Infantry Regiment 178, who are covering the left-hand side of the valley from our point of view, and 106 right down in the bottom. So this is heavily defended, and this is the main line of resistance. They have a series of outposts in some of the woods running down the valley. In the wood they refer to as square wood, and out on some of the farms. Also in the rolling countryside of this valley, they have got machine gun posts further down to knock out our attack as it comes. So it's a very good defensive position. They have gone from offensive to defensive almost without missing a beat. Now, hopefully you can see this is the 3D image, because where we've got those units just flat on the map, it's hard to appreciate just how well they've set this out. So what they have done is to lay out a defense based on machine guns. Now, at the time, notionally, a German battalion ought to have about 1,000 men in it. Some of them are down to a matter of hundreds. It looks like these guys are in better shape because they have been re-equipped for the offensive. But they have got within these battalions about 12 what they call heavy machine guns. They're actually the same caliber as a normal machine gun. It's just they're sitting on a very heavy metal four-legged carriage. They've also got light machine guns at about 24 per battalion, and those are the ones that are on bipods. And they've based their defense on these machine guns. Now, these positions on the map are only the ones that I know about from the German records. So there's a lot more machine guns than this, but I can't tell you where they are, so I've only put these ones on. So you can see there's a heavy infestation of machine guns between Marfaux and the bottom of the stream. Citron, that top one, is also a machine gun nest. High up on the hill, on this spur, is 351 machine gun companies, 3 companies, and they have their heavies sitting there where they can fire down the whole valley. On the other side of the valley, 178 have got a series of machine guns which fire both down the valley and up the hill into where the 51st Division will attack. And they have also placed a series of outposts. They've fortified the square wood, they've fortified the farm, and then laid out from there across the valley, the 53rd has its outposts. There's an extraordinary number of machine guns in this valley. Across those various units, there's probably 62 heavy machine guns and at least 96 light machine guns. Those machine guns are capable of firing 400 rounds a minute from a 250 round belt. There's a great deal of power, although there may not be many individual Germans, there's a lot of guns in this valley. Now, the other complexity of this valley, this is the farm down here. And for those of you walking this battlefield, it does off sales of the local champagne. It's a great battlefield. Now, if from where you took that photograph, you turned around and you looked across the valley, you would then see this spur of the Bois de Petit Champ. The effective range of one of these machine guns, an MG08, is easily 2,200 yards. So you can fire from there to there without that much difficulty. As you make your way down the valley, here is the farm, here is the square wood. This photograph is taken from the start line on the 20th of July, and this is the area the 2nd, 5th will go down, the 8th West Yorks will go down the right. That spur there, you can see how steep the ground is, but also that is the Bois de Petit Champ. So those machine guns can be brought into action pretty much the moment that you step off the start line. This is a great defensive position. So let us have a little look at what happens when the irresistible force of the 62nd Division meets these defences. I'm not going to do a blow by blow because what is important is the position at dusk on the 20th of July. Now, the mission, starting from just outside Poissy, is to clear the valley not only through Marfaux and through Chamusy, but actually beyond and almost to Bligny on the first day. And they are advancing 2 brigades up, 185th on the left, 187th up here on the heights on the right. So we'll look at the valley first to see what takes place there. Now, by the end of the day, the 2nd, 5th West Yorks has taken in excess of 400 casualties, as they have gone straight down the bottom of the valley into that storm of fire, because the southern side of the valley is so dangerous that where the 51st have tried to push over the ridge and into the valley, they've been caught in the machine gun fire and they've stayed the other side. So the left flank is completely open on the day. 2nd, 5th, very badly damaged. The 8th West Yorks, who went in on the right, have essentially been broken. And by dusk, they are making their way in individual and small groups back towards Poissy to reform. They are actually no longer an effective fighting force by the end of the day. The 3rd Battalion of the 85th, the Devons, is still in position, and they have taken 34 dead in getting there. And the line has slowly been filled in. The 2nd, 4th Duke of Wellingtons, they were actually in the support brigade. They've had to come up to the front, they've had to cross to the left of the area, they've had to take the farm and attempt to take the square wood, simply to reduce the enfilade that is going in. The Hampshires have been brought forward, and you can see the death toll mounting from their attack that day. 5th Duke of Wellingtons, also from the support, that's 2 companies in the valley, they have taken 24 dead. Now, it's very hard to get consistent casualty numbers. Some of these battalions don't report their casualties, they report them in aggregate 2 or 3 days later. So in order to see quite how this has panned out, we need to go to the German records. And later on in the day, 51st Division does actually manage to get into the valley and draw up a position on the left. And their casualties I cannot speak to. To the German records, 178, which has been attacked frontally and from the side by the Scots, they're reporting 34 dead. 53, defending Marfaux, 16 dead. 351, 3. The 106 has had a tougher day with 37. Okay. IF comes in, 158 comes in later in the day. They don't actually report any casualties in their battalion history. But what you can see here is you've got about, let's call it 90. Over here you've got 270 dead. So the Germans have inflicted 3 times the number of casualties on the attacking force. For the 62nd Division, this is a disaster. And the story on the hill, however, is slightly different. So we have 5th Coylie, 2nd, 4th Coylie, and 2nd, 4th York and Lancashire, known as the Hallamshires. And they are taking on the 39th Fusilier Regiment. Now, the first 2 battalions there are pretty much stopped dead at the start of the attack. The Hallamshires, they go on a rather interesting trip because they manage to get through the woods. And they go as far, first of, as the chateau in the woods here, which has been heavily fortified. Heavy machine guns firing out of the cellars where they've removed bricks, light machine guns firing out of the 1st and 2nd floors. And the doctrine of the time essentially allows them to go round it. So it's too tough a nut, and they move on. And they move right up to the village of Bouilly, which they clear and capture. The French have not managed to move up on their right. The rest of the brigade has not managed to move up on their left, so they are actually forced to retreat. And they come back into a position just north of Cormas. And again, the casualties, the numbers of dead in these battalions are really quite high when the Fusilier Regiment is reporting against these casualties 9 dead. It has been a very bad day for the division. And often when we're doing First World War stuff, this is where we stop. A disastrous attack, lots of casualties, that's terrible, and we move on. I would like with you just to have a tactical pause for a moment and take you to a completely different war. In the 1960s, Jack Weller published a book called Wellington at Waterloo. That book tried to reconstruct the Battle of Waterloo based on what Wellington could see from where he was standing and what he knew to be the case from the reports that he was getting. And it's a fascinating way of looking at battle because it takes out the hindsight. It takes out the fact that we know where these units were, we know how strong they were. What I'd like to do is to look now at what the 62nd had to do to respond to the situation that it finds itself in. And that falls onto this man, General Burnett, who's commanding the 186th Brigade. Now, he doesn't have the luxury of all the maps and the knowledge of what was going on the other side of the hill that we have. So what he does know, coming down from on high, is that the division has decided it cannot go down the valley. And it's been unable to reinforce the success on the hill. Still, in order to conduct that overall plan, they have to nip off the salient. They have to attack the right-hand side of the salient. For that, you have to have the Ardre Valley. And to have the Ardre Valley, you have to have this spur in the Bois de Petit Champ, inhabited on day 1 by the 351st, but then heavily reinforced. So he decides they have to clear this wood on the 22nd. Now, this is roughly the information he has about where his units are. That's his estimation of where the forward line of our own troops is. But he has got more resources at his disposal. So down in the valley, 2nd Lieutenant Gwynn of the 2nd 5th Battalion has walked the line. And he has produced this handwritten map, which tells Burnett where his units are and the level of fighting strength that they have got. So, for example, the 1st 5th Devons that had gone into the battle 600 rifles strong now have 150 effectives in the line. The 2nd 5th, down here, again 600 strong, now has 60 effectives in the line. So he's got this to tell him what's going on in the valley. He's got this, a slightly better map, to tell him what is going on the hill. This one's in colour as well in the original. So he knows that the Hallamshires have actually got a position north of Cormas where they can pretty well see the chateau. He knows that the 5th Coylie have just about got a position inside the Bois de Petit Champ. These are the pieces that he has to manoeuvre. Now, during the 21st, they put in an attack on the Bois de Petit-Champ using the 9th Battalion and Durham Light Infantry. Now, in the morning of the 20th, they had 9 combat-ready battalions, and in the morning of the 21st, they're attacking using the divisional pioneers. You don't do that unless you've got a major problem. And that battalion is repulsed. So, on the night of the 21st, 22nd, here at the Farm d'Écule, all 3 brigade headquarters are co-located. Now, we know that the 62nd held brigade conferences when it was putting its orders together, because we know one happened on the 19th. We don't know that one happened on the 21st, 22nd, but I'm going to hypothesize that because they were all together, Burnett sat these people down and said, right, we will now work out what we're going to do. So, what does he know? He knows he's lost 46 officers and 775 other ranks. What he doesn't know is that actually he's lost 80 officers and 2,250 other ranks, because the shattered battalions in the valley actually can't get the information to him. 187 has no battalion ready to fight. 185 don't really know where some of it is because it's trickling back down the valley. Excuse me. 186 has 1 good battalion left, so it is on to 186 that the weight of the attack will fall. He's also got doubts about the quality of his intelligence. The French intelligence has told him that the Germans are preparing to withdraw. And that is true. In Ludendorff's account, around the 20th, he is starting to issue orders to pull back. But that is generally true. It is not specifically true for the forces that the 62nd is up against. They are guarding the sides of this salient. And those units, as far as I can tell, have had no instructions that they are going to withdraw. In fact, their instructions say that they may well move forward on the 22nd. So if the Germans are about to retreat, no one has informed the Germans. He has also captured 3 officers and 53 other ranks. Now, why is that important here? There is a complaint in the divisional records that brigades are failing to send prisoners to division, are holding on to them and interrogating them themselves in a rather amateur fashion. It's quite strongly worded. People are very cross about this. But in the 185th and present in this farm on that night is this gentleman, Second Lieutenant Edgar Commode. He is a very experienced patrol officer. He has captured a couple of dozen German prisoners on those patrols. He is also fluent in German and used to go on listening patrols out in no man's land because he could actually work out what people were saying. He's present in the farm. Those prisoners are present in the farm. So it is not unreasonable to believe that the brigades are actually interrogating these men. And what they are now saying is it is no longer the machine gun companies of 351 in the Bois de Petit-Champ. They are telling them that there are 2 battalions of 400 soldiers now in the Bois de Petit-Champ. So it's actually got more difficult to take this while they've been thinking through. So what does thinking through a problem like this actually look like? Burnett's got 3 things to worry about at this point. What's different, what's not working, and what is working. So, what's different? This is not the Somme. These are big open valleys full of corn with vistas of 1.5 miles and then very, very dense woodland on the top. Braithwaite himself says that these woods are so dense that they remind him of the jungles of Burma. And when you look at the photographs, and we're very lucky, we have a lot of photographs that were taken in this week on location. So this is actually some of the woodland next to the valley, and you can see visibility is actually very poor. There's also a problem with the machine gun nests. Most machine gun nests, you imagine a machine gun crew, a few boxes of ammunition. These machine gun nests have 30 to 40 men in them. They are reinforced platoon size. They have 4 light machine guns, they have 2 heavy machine guns. They are hidden in these woods. They have not cleared fields of fire, they're shooting at sound. And this poor young man who's lost his life in one of those positions, look at the trench that he is in. Look at the cover. These positions are almost impossible to find, and they are just popping up, firing, and disappearing again. The positions have been put with mutual fields of fire, and they have created what are referred to as a bartis, natural barbed wire, the weaving together of obstacles to protect the position, but also to funnel incoming troops. German artillery, their FOOs have been right at the front. They've been splendid on the day. They're using shrapnel on the tops of the folds of the valley. They're putting gas into the folds of the valley, and they have got perfect observation of what's going on. They have managed to do a rolling relief of the front line. The 178th and the 53rd Infantry Regiment are replaced, including their outposts, at the height of the battle on the 20th of July. So you're taking one unit that's in contact out, bringing another unit in, and putting it, and their records say that there was a certain amount of confusion, and that's all they say. They've done this successfully. So anything we may believe about the decline in the combat qualities of the German army at this point in 1918, no one has told the 53rd. Now, what's not working? Most of this is taken from comments made by senior officers in the immediate aftermath of the battle, and clearly going down that valley, that was not working. They tried advancing down the tracks in the woods, and this is a track in the woods next to the chateau where the Hallamshires have gone. These tracks have all been pre-registered for artillery fire, and they have machine guns at the end of them. If you move, that's the last thing you'll do. The bombing tactics. Bombing tactics are not working. Anyone who's ever thrown a ball for a dog in a wood knows that it has a tendency to come back. You start doing that with Mills bombs, and it's going to get very dangerous for people. The rifle grenades, they've got the new Burns discharger. Those are bouncing off the trees as well. Also, if you've got this, after you've fired your rifle grenade, you can't fix the bayonet and you can't use the sights. So there are a lot of men feeling really quite helpless. They're not happy with the bombing. The Vickers guns, they're used to being well back, and they can't see anything from well back. And the after-action reports, what they were most nervous about was Vickers guns travel on mules, and you mustn't lose the mules. So they're not going very far forward, and they're not really used to carrying those enormous machine guns around. So there's a problem with the Vickers gun tactics. They're more used to barrage and direct fire. The artillery is also a problem. On the first day, the barrage falls 1,000 yards in front of the line of our own troops. That's 4 times the distance these guys are used to, because they can't work out where their artillery is. And they've got Italian, French, and British artillery firing. They can't really get the plan and the communications together. So there's been a big problem. But one of the biggest problems that they've got is the formations that they're using. And this, bedtime reading again, this is the formation they attack in. It's called artillery formation. The long lines of the early days of the Somme, they're gone. Now you move in a series of specialist units. And these are riflemen, Lewis gunners, rifle bombers, and bombers. Formation is about 50 yards long. So why is this a problem? Second tactical pause on the nature of machine guns. Many of you may not have fired a belt machine gun recently, although I suspect some of you have. So when you fire a machine gun, all of the rounds do not go in a nice straight line. It is an area fire weapon. It goes up in a cone of fire and it lands in something called a beaten zone. Lots of rounds landing in a particular confined space, and actually that space is quite easy to define. This is not, I'm afraid, the MG08. This is the Vickers machine gun, so it's a very similar gun. I haven't got beaten zones for an MG08. But you can see that at different ranges, you get a different shape of beaten zone. So if you are engaging oncoming British infantry at, let's say, 1,400 yards, which is reasonable for these machine guns, and you're in that formation, the beaten zone of the enemy machine gun neatly encompasses the advancing formation. And the 106th Reserve Infantry Regiment states specifically that the English and the Scots advanced in tight columns, dichte Kolonne, and that the reason that they inflicted so many casualties on the day was that that formation could easily have artillery and machine gun fire brought down on it. So the formations are not working. What is working is a position astride the ridge. The ground up there being more broken, you can get through. The chateau, you can go round. And curiously, the infiltration through the woods is working. When you're moving in a much lighter formation, it seems to be harder for the Germans to concentrate their fire. The rear area, that's all sorting itself out, particularly the artillery, and there is a huge amount of artillery. The division carries with it, obviously, 3 field artillery regiments, 24 guns each. They've also got 9 batteries of 75 millimeters from the French and another 8 batteries of 155 millimeters from the French. There's an extraordinary amount of artillery on this battlefield. You've just got to find somewhere to use it. So, what should we do? Different plan. Use the cover, adjust the weapon systems, get the Vickers guns through. What does this mean? Okay, so they are going to use entirely novel formations in order to get through the woods. This is from the after action report. Exceptional formation to suit their needs. They're dropping their bombs off. They have doubled the number of Lewis guns in the section. And they've brought the number of drums up from 12 to 17. These guys are going in, as the Americans would say, loaded for bear. Now, the crews will rapidly become exhausted because these things are damn heavy, but they've got a huge amount of firepower now at the front. They're moving the Vickers guns forward, and they are now saying it is up to the machine gun officer controlling the Vickers to liaise with the officer on the spot and look for direct targets. So suddenly, the Vickers guns are right back in the front. This is also true of the artillery. So the artillery now has freelance artillery officers up there looking for trouble who have the right to move batteries around the place. So you're not talking to the brigade commander anymore, you're not talking to the battalion commander, you are right in there looking for targets and places for the artillery to go. They're going to get close. So it's described as a section officer's battle. This is about, as they say, you will act on initiative and without awaiting orders. You have to have enormous confidence to delegate such responsibility for a battle that you cannot see, cannot work out where it's going on, and cannot control. You are letting loose the talent of your officers and men. So, does it work? Let's go back to the Bois de Petit Champ. 11:30 a.m. on the 22nd. 5th Duke of York's approaches the Bois de Petit Champ. And at 12:15, a barrage hits it. Now, this barrage will be different. It's not going to move 100 yards in 6 minutes. It's going to move 100 yards. It's going to move 50 yards in 5. So they've slowed it right down. They have more guns. They're also targeting it differently. If you imagine a barrage, which tends to be sort of wide and thin, that's great for trench systems, because trench systems are also wide and thin. But if you are in one strong point, most of those shells are going to fall either side of you. They've refused because they believed that the fuses that they were firing were going off in the treetops, and they wanted to get down to the ground. And they've got the heavies saying, we think the Germans are there. So that's where we're going to hit. The barrage will hit, the barrage will stick, and it will move slowly thereafter. And then, in 2 formations, the battalion is split, each only a platoon wide, they start to infiltrate into the woods. And every 250 meters, they drop off a platoon. And they create a strong point there with machine guns and all-round defense. And then individual infantry sections move between these positions, clearing the woods. Once the wood is clear, you move on another step and repeat, creating strong points. And this starts to work. Only 250 yards in, they hit a nest of 20 men and 4 machine guns in the top position. They capture that. The southern infiltration finds 5 nests, each of which is consecutively taken. And as they slowly move in, they manage to clear this southern edge of the wood. Now, somewhere in here is a major strong point. And when the northern side hits it, they can't locate it and they can't destroy it. They try and take it out with a bayonet. That's not great. But instead of being ejected from the wood, as they formerly were, they just fall back 250 yards onto the strong point, and they're still in there. Down on the spur, C Company actually manages to get all the way and up into the northwestern corner of the wood. So they have pushed back the Germans from this terribly dangerous position where they can enfilade the valley. The Germans counterattack and re-establish a small position, but the critical thing is 2 officers, 206 men, and critically 42 machine guns have been captured. Now the wood is held, the scene is set for the attack the next morning when 186 Brigade will go down the valley with the New Zealand attachments and break through. Once again, no one has informed the Germans that they have been beaten. And at midnight, German counterattack drives straight through and retakes the spur. Word reaches brigade headquarters at midnight. The attack that will go in at 6 o'clock the next morning will face exactly the same conditions of the disastrous attack on the 20th of July. You have 6 hours to fix it. By 1:30 in the morning, they'd formulated a plan, informed division of it, and were getting ready to move. They knew that orders said the attack would go in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they allowed the positioning for that attack to go forward, but not the trigger to attack. So down in the valley, people are forming up. At 06:50, Burnett has turned to the shattered remnants of the 8th West Yorks, who can only form 2 composite companies. And he is going to send them into this wood in an improvised formation to take it back. Now, so many guides have got lost and confused during this process that the colonel of the Duke of Wellington's and the colonel of the 8th West Yorks personally lead these composite companies to the start line. So there can be absolutely no mistake. And then, at 7:20, with the barrage having hit, they go in. Now, casualties are taken. In fact, the southern side, they lose all of their officers within about the first 20 minutes. But at 7:30, the company has broken down to a section level. So we're now dealing with combat by groups of 8 infantrymen with fixed bayonets and their Lewis gun teams. And they are fighting through this position. At 7:30, they reach here, and they've taken the spur. So although they've not taken the whole wood, they have pushed those machine guns back out of the enfilade. That's happening way up in that wood at 7:30. 12 minutes later, the forces in the valley that are 300 yards from Marfaux are unleashed onto the main German line of resistance. And at 8:18, they have surrounded, captured Marfaux and Citron and destroyed all resistance on that line. They put this plan together in an hour and a half, devised it, communicated it, coordinated it, and delivered it. Many of you may have seen this photograph before. It turns up in a lot of books. In the diary of the officer commanding one of those groups in the Petit Champ, this is Captain Harry Burrows. And in his diary, it states that as they were making their way back from this attack, this is now lunchtime on the 24th, because they still had to clear the rest of the wood. And they didn't do that until the end of the 23rd, capturing some more machine guns, 2 light mortars, and a searchlight. No idea what the searchlight was for. But his diary says, as we left the wood, we were snapped by the official photographer. And when I showed this photograph to Harry's son, he said, yep, that is my father. So these are the men who took the Bois de Petit Champ that morning. And very happy they look to be coming out. You will also notice there's not very many of them. So what's been achieved? In 3 days, they've taken 60 machine guns. In the week of combat, they take 94. And again, the official photographer is there. These photographs are not for color. These are the machine guns that were taken that day, and there's lots of photographs of them coming back. Now, if we remember at the start, the frontline units had 94 light machine guns and 60 heavies, so they've taken a good proportion of the machine guns that were available to the units in that valley, along with assorted mine throwers and searchlights. So in terms of capturing crew-served weapons, these are hard to replace. Machine guns are in short supply at the moment. You don't want to lose them. As far as captures are concerned, and again, this is the real thing, this is clearly posed, and this poor German prisoner has been stuck back in his hole for the purposes of the camera. But they've taken, in those 3 days, 7 officers and 250 other ranks. In the week, they will take 529. Now, some of the battalions that they're now facing are now down to a couple of hundred rifles. So they've taken the equivalent of 2 battalions during this period. It has been a very successful series of captures. And many of these men are from the 53rd, which is a very good unit indeed. So this is a very black day for the enemy. Casualties, as we've said, casualties are very hard to assess. The German records are from 8 or 9 years later, and the British records are really quite inconsistent at times. This is the contents of the cemetery at Marfaux. Now, I've been through the individual battalion histories, and you can see 21st, 22nd, 23rd, the numbers kicking up. So there are 2,720 German soldiers in that cemetery alone. Individually, as far as some of these battalions are concerned, Infantry Regiment 53, if you take all the killed, wounded and missing together, you have got 828 casualties. That regiment is broken. The 106, they have taken 653 casualties. The Fusiliers on the hill have barely 200 men left. And in fact, all 4 divisions that are facing the British in the Ardre Valley, it's 123rd, 103rd, 22nd and 50th, have to be relieved, brought out, and are not fit for combat. Now, why is that important? The regiments that were behind that salient were earmarked to move. They were going north to Flanders. They were going to be part of something called Operation Hagen, which was going to be the next massive thrust of the thing we know as the March Offensive. Ludendorff cancels it. He no longer has enough combat-ready units to do that offensive. And one of the reasons that he doesn't have enough is because of the losses he takes in the Ardre Valley. So way down in the south, in this obscure little battle, those 4 British divisions contribute to saving Flanders and the final defeat of that March offensive, because now we've got counterattack. And following counterattack, we have counteroffensive. And following that, we have the 100 days. And in this week, you start to see the seeds of where that is going to come from. So, a few conclusions. What can we learn from this? Aside from the story, which I hope you found interesting, what you are starting to see is the ability of a massive fighting unit like a division to delegate responsibility right down to their lowest tactical level. You can see how they can vary the doctrines that they've been taught, create a toolbox of different formations, different weapon systems, different approaches, so that as they are faced with new circumstances, they can maneuver their approach to battle to meet those new circumstances. This is not in any way formulaic. This is a modern professional battle, and they can take that right down through the chain of command to the way that individual sections of soldiers are fighting on a terrain that they have never seen before, and turn it around in the space of 72 hours, while taking huge casualties and having to sort themselves out. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you that superb instrument of war, the 62nd Division. Thank you.
Out Out of kicking armateers, volley-boo. Out of kicking armateers, volley-boo. Out of kicking armateers, broke the spell of 40 years, hickey-dickey, volley-boo. The officers get